And hello also to our guest, Doc Burford, or at Doc Squiddy on Twitter. Hey man, what up?
Hey, just looking at pictures of Nemesis from Resident Evil 3.
Good.
What? Why?
I don't know, it was on Twitter.
Okay, that's cool.
That's the
I
good
like that.
absent energy that we want. We want that distracted, not quite fully there vibe. It's strong.
Wait, is it from RE3 or is it like from the Dead by Daylight version?
It's
'Cause he
RE3.
looks. Oh, okay. Because he looks good
Somebody
in Dead
posted
by
pictures
Daylight.
of like every version, and I was just,
Some
I
are
had the tab up.
considerably much better than others.
Makes sense.
All right. So what's
Is it
up,
just
Woolie?
is it just me or was his face a little weird in that Dead by Daylight trailer?
His face was actually way more weird in the remake itself.
Oh, so it stems further back. Okay.
So, in the 3 remake, his face was like pretty good, except for his teeth. His teeth were like completely flat and like no jagged edges. And in the Dead by Daylight one, his teeth are a little more fucked up and a little more realistic, but otherwise very the same.
Okay. Well, I was looking at it and I was like, yeah, that seems a little different from the last time I saw him in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Yeah. Correct. Anyway, so yes, welcome. It is a pleasure to have you with us, Doc.
It's a
For
pleasure to be
any,
here.
yeah, for anyone who's not in the know, Doc Squiddy, as he's known on Twitter, is the genius behind Adios, the game that we were pumping up big, I would say, a couple weeks ago.
And Paratopic, my favorite game that I don't understand at all.
In general, what we were describing as a work of short narrative genius. Not to, you know, pile it on here, but that shit was pretty cool, man.
I mean, I had fun watching, right? Just seeing, the responses to it, watching both of you kind of play it and how you were reacting. It's like very few things are as validating as that, just watching somebody play your game and like get it. And I felt like both of you got what I was going for, which made me really, really happy. I don't know if I'd call it a
What
work of genius, but
what was the intention behind the dinner scene that the farmer is so nervous that he has trouble making himself dinner?
uh so I'm trying to figure out the nicest way to say this. Um
Uh huh.
our programmer and I had a little bit of an argument. Cameron is a wonderful person. But we were arguing about how to implement the scene. And he really wanted to make it physics based. And I was like, I don't know if we're good enough to do that yet. So it's a physics based scene. I think maybe in hindsight it would have been better if it wasn't physics based and you click on where it goes and it just appears there. Um but it's physics based and that leads to, unintentional comedy. To me, having a last meal was really important for that scene. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted the player to kind of sit there and go, "What would I get for my last meal?" Which is one of the reasons why there's a breakfast burrito in the fridge. Is like you could just eat a breakfast burrito as your last meal. You could do it, but it doesn't have to be that. You can cook your own last meal. And so I tried to, put a few meals in there, but because it's physics based, I think it's a little, you know,
How
it's our
did
team's first time making a game
My
together,
ren
so
my
it is what it
rendition
is.
of that was that I was very nervous.
okay? I was gonna say, how did your cooking go? Because mine was a struggle.
Mine, I like outright failed, and I think I had to
Mm-hmm.
restart from a checkpoint.
Yeah. Okay.
Just
Well, I mean, it's like I don't throw the term around in general, but no, I really do say narrative genius because I do feel that like there aren't a lot of games I experience that have like just like a really specific attention put towards the writing, you know, um,
Yeah.
and the way that like in a really short experience you get pretty much all the context you need from just like what's mise en scène and like what and the relationship that these two characters have, and it's the kind of thing that I'm like, I want more video games that are like this, just like a short narrative, really tight story, you know?
I I think a big part of that was because of how we started, right? Like a lot of people when they start with a game, I was reading a Reddit thread by some guy and he's like, "How do you guys come up with your game mechanics?" Like I'm trying to come up with a core loop and he's talking about like very sort of video game academic like, "Oh, I just learned how to make games on YouTube" terminology, which is what you get when you're new. But he's talking about like what he's trying to like make a game and I'm just like I read an article about a person who fell down in her pig pen after a seizure and was eaten by her pigs, and that was really interesting to me because it felt sad, and I wanted to capture that feeling.
Wow.
So I sat down and I planned out the game in just a couple like Discord conversations, and like it was about a month, and then we had it pitched. And we were at GDC talking to people about like, hey, do you want to give us money so we can make this really weird game? And of course, every reaction was, what the fuck? But ID at Xbox gave us a little bit of cash to help us get going, and we made the game because of it. I don't think it would have worked without the voice acting, so we could have made it for free with like no voices. It would not have been as good.
No.
Oh man, it
no, you
definitely
need that.
would have not worked at all without the voice acting.
You need that, yeah. Like it like reading that script out would be, like a kind of interesting little kind of ditty, but like it's memorable because of the voice acting, I would say. And I think
I had to
like
go back and change some of it too, just because the voice actors would read lines differently, and we were better because of that. Like they would be like, "Huh, maybe this sounds better," and then they'd ask if they could do it, and I'd be like, "Absolutely, go for it," and they do it, and it was just incredible. So it's not just my script. The actors,
Okay.
they changed it a little bit. Like it's not like most of those 4,700 words or so are mine, but there are just some sentences and stuff I had to go back and like change in the actual text. And I think I missed one because people commented on it. I think Woolie in your stream, they're like, "Hey, the subtitles don't match the thing." It's like, "Fuck, I missed one." But yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no,
Are you telling me, narrative genius behind Adios, that it is not a sole invention of your own twisted mind?
Nothing is. I mean that's just the truth of it, right? You got to
Do
collab
you-
with people.
Do you guys remember that old, I think it was IGN article, might have been PC Gamer, that was interviewing Warren Spector, and the quote
That's
is like,
IGN, yeah.
I was like, I really think that like individuals get too much credit. It's a huge team effort, and then the end quote, and it says Warren Spector, creator of the Thief and Deus Ex franchises. I was like, fucking come on.
I think a pretty like after thinking about it after completion, a takeaway that I dig is that something I'm always like a fan of and I look for is familiar stories or ideas told from a different perspective that kind of present you with more insight on something that would otherwise be dismissed. And to relate it to this, the vibe I get is like this kind of story would be a side quest in a game about the mafia guy, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is the kind of story where if you're playing, some big action game and you have L and R are going to be aimed down the sights and shoot your gun, right? Then you're going to have a side quest where you have someone you go talk to, and then you have to make this tough decision, and then in the end you do your job and go back and get your pay, and the story goes on because whatever, But
Yeah.
but just kind of like taking the camera and putting it over here instead, you get to focus on more minute, more like subtle things, and like go look at his pop can collection, have the phone calls that you have, and all these things that you otherwise wouldn't spend attention telling or really like doing in a game that was about the action guy,
Yeah, I mean, so the first game that I thought of that kind of actually takes place in this world, I didn't even realize was in this world, because there's several, right? But the very first one was actually Adios 2, which obviously hasn't been made yet. But that game starts with you at a like a fried rice stand, like on a beach somewhere, and you're making food for people. And then some guy comes up and he's like, "Hey, I know you. You're that guy that used to kill people, and I want you to kill somebody for me, or I'm going to tell people that, you're not actually dead, because he faked his death." And it took me years to realize, oh, that's Hitman. So Adios 2 is going to be Hitman's game, but it's a very different game than still the action thing. Like we're still going for that goal of like telling a story, that's not the kind of story you'd expect. And that's, I mean, it's because I played so many games that are like the same kind of story that it's boring. Like, why would I want to make something somebody else made when I could make something I haven't seen before?
Precisely.
You know, and I was sitting there at GDC, and there's this person named Kevin, and Kevin was giving a talk on a game called, I want to say, Southern Monsters or Southern Monster, I believe, and it's a game they kickstarted, adventure game about a like living in Arkansas, and they mentioned something about how some people had commented like, "Oh, I've been to this house like that you have art from. Like I know what this house is, even though I've never actually been to the game house. Like I recognize this space." And for me, it was like a light bulb just flicking on in my head. Like that's what I've been chasing this whole time, and I finally somebody's put it to words. Just me sitting here in this talk listening, and it was like I want to make sure that that's what I'm capturing. And so it let me kind of center in on like what I'd already been thinking about but didn't have words for. And that kind of became my goal for everything after. So like I'd be driving past this beat up car place, and they had all these old cars out front, and one was an El Camino. I was like,
I was gonna
that is
ask,
the
yeah.
ugliest car I've ever seen. Like I love El Caminos. They're just terrible cars. And so I've been putting one in every game that I have since. Obviously, when I freelance on something like Hard Space Shipbreaker, I can't put an El Camino in that game. But when I have control, when I can do it, obviously if I make a fantasy game, an El Camino is not going to make sense. But when I can put it in a
You don't know that
game, I mean, it's true. I don't know that. I might find a way to put an El Camino in a fantasy game, but for the time being, what I'm doing is trying to make these like spaces that feel real and lived in a way that a game often doesn't, because a game is like copying what movies are doing. Like you play Grand Theft Auto 5 and it's like, oh, these guys just really like Martin Scorsese. You play Red Dead Redemption, oh hey, look, it's Sam Peckinpah. I want to be like, no, this is like a thing you haven't seen before, and it's familiar, but it's making you consider it in a way you haven't. So I'm always looking for little details. Like drove past a sushi bar one time, and they had like we have all these things, and then they just had it like X'd out one of their dishes on the sign, and I'm like, why would they X out like one dish? Like why is takoyaki suddenly X'd out, right? And you can put little details like that in there, and then you can have a conversation where they talk about it. So when I talk about the chestnut trees in Adios, I know a lot of people are like, what's the point, right? I grew up and I worked for a guy who was he wouldn't tell me where he found one, but he found an actual chestnut tree that had not caught the blight. And he's like, it's a secret. I can't tell anyone. If it ever gets out, like a bunch of people try to go, see it or whatever, it could get contaminated. Like to him, it was this treasure he was protecting. And that was really fascinating to me, that obsession with like chestnut trees. So, I put that in the game partly for that reason, and partly because I really want to show off Saul. Because we only get like a couple scenes with him, but he has an entire game. Like I want to give him a whole game. But having him kind of show up in that scene and read it wrong, like go, oh, is this seeing this chestnut tree, is that like don't trust outsiders? And farmer's like, no, it's not about that. I don't know what it's about. That was important to me, so that we get Saul and we'll understand him more later, because the real quote-unquote genius of this game is I'm planting seeds for like a bunch of different games, and if even one of them comes out, people are going to be like, oh my god, he did it. And I'm like, yeah, I was hedging my bets.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is one of those games Horse Game?
Yes. Yes, one of those games is a worse game. So that'll be Alan Wake sized video. Like it's literally me making an Alan Wake fan game almost, right? Except that the bad guys are horses. One day I'm gonna get to make that game. I'm really excited about it.
So,
but
so please look forward to the
hard.
Adioverse.
Probably, yeah.
Are we coining this term right now, the Adioverse?
I think I've just been calling it the Tex-Mex universe.
Sure.
Because
Okay.
all the
Oh,
names in that universe except for Horse Game, which has a different name, all the game names I have for that are Tex-Mex related. Like the one about the El Camino where they talk about giving it to a guy who's fighting in the Gulf War. Which is, weird because the game is in 1992, so it's weird that the Gulf War is still ongoing, but there are reasons for that. Which is that Saddam Hussein is resurrecting Ishtar, the goddess of the dead. But that's a whole other thing. But yeah, that guy has his own game, and he's kind of, I'm not gonna say the main character of the universe, but the character Slick, who's mentioned there, shows up in every single game, or at least is referenced in every single game in that universe. And I'm really excited by him. He's like my favorite character ever. He's just incredibly sad and has just great abs.
All right, we're
I'm
just
gonna-
gonna
I'm gonna
slide
take a
right
second.
past that Saddam Hussein and Ishtar comment.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a second here. I'm seeing it. I'm watching the live chat while you're talking, Doc, and I see a lot of like just overt confusion. And as somebody who's been talking to Doc for quite a while, no, he's not joking. He actually means that. In the background of Adios, Ishtar is being resurrected. It's a whole thing.
Yes. Yeah. A lot of people ask me, like, how do you come up with your ideas or whatever? It's like, it's very simple. I take pride in coming up with ideas that sound impossible and then making them possible. Like, nobody thought Adios could get made except the nice people at Microsoft before it got made. Like, when people heard it, like, oh, this is a game about a pig farmer who, doesn't want to dispose of bodies for the mob anymore, they're like, what does that even look like? They couldn't envision what that game might be. And I take a perverse pleasure in being like, it's this, and it works somehow. That's where the fun is like coming up with the impossible. Now my next game, probably gonna be a waifu simulator. But that's a whole other.
That's
a whole
that
other thing.
related to the Tex-Mex
It's
shenanigans?
not. It's the cheapest game we think we can make based on the amount of money we made from selling Adios. We can't just go into Project D or any of the other projects I want to make. Can't make it the big open world RPG I want to make. About the boy who's got cursed to have a head of a cow. I can't do anything like that. So for now, we're making a waifu/husbando simulator. That's a small isometric RPG.
Well, my favorite part of these meaningful scenes that are written in is my ability to any percent speedrun QA skip them with one frame links into bug skips, because apparently that's a thing.
When you skipped the dog, it broke me. That for me, that the whole game builds to that scene, and then you got past it, and Cameron and I are just sitting there going, "What the fuck?" And we found it. It's like, oh yeah, there's about a 1 second window where if you do something with the phone right before it, it will actually skip that scene. So we patched it. It shouldn't be skippable anymore. But God, I mean, you can only do so much QA, especially when it's two people who are running out of money, and we've got nothing left in the tank, basically.
I mean, but also
terrifying.
no, my testing aura is it comes out even when I don't want it to happen on stream constantly.
Some people have it, some people don't. You, Paige, and Shy break everything you fucking touch. I seem to be spared from this curse. But you three, every time I see you do anything, the shit just completely flies apart.
But it's like
it helps us though.
Pardon?
We're grateful for it. It helps
hey.
us. We're grateful for it. So because it means we can fix it.
No, sure. I didn't write up a bug report and submit it to the database, but I thought those days were behind me. But they're following me in everything I play. But the fact though that it was it wasn't one of the beginning or middle things. It was those final scenes it builds up to give you kind of one of these is gonna break you, right? Either your phone call or the dog. One of these scenes is going to annihilate you, the player, and pick and choose which one almost, and I mean,
it was funny because right after Woolie beat Adios, I talked to him about it, and I was like, oh man, that dog scene's the best in the game. He's like, really? Because I felt that the phone call was the best in the game. And it's like, it's fascinating.
Because go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, what's so great about your observation there is that's the reaction I'm seeing to the game. People mention one of the two scenes. They all of them are those scenes are the ones they always zero in on. They'll talk about the other scenes, but those are the ones. And I mean, that's the point though, right? I wrote the game building up to those scenes. So I know they're gonna happen. And I'm building everything to get you there. It's people always talk about the punchline in a joke, they don't talk about the setup that much. But you need that setup to get the punchline. Otherwise, if you just shout to get to the other side, who gives a shit, right? And it's the same with horror games. You can't have horror unless you had terror building up to it, or people are afraid. people are always like, "Oh, I prefer the horror games when there's that sense of like creeping dread that builds up to whatever the shock is, right?" Well, yeah, it's literally all joke construction, setup, payoff. That's it, and that's what those scenes are. Is they are the payoff, and it's really interesting how people respond to one or the other more. It makes me really happy. It's like I covered everybody.
Hmm. Yeah, it really, that's the thing. Like after, again, like yeah, Pat brought that up. I was just like, yeah, okay, no, this whichever hits closer to home. Like these are two experiences that a lot of people are gonna have, you know, and it absolutely just it nailed that. Well, I'm glad I was able to like load back in and get the dog scene, you know, but
Hmm.
yeah, those are definitely the two that stand out. I'm curious, how do you feel about the term walking simulator?
So I love it, but that's because so unlike a lot of people who grew up, oh, I had this console when I was really young. I have fond memories of playing games with my parents, blah blah whatever. I don't have any of that. My parents hated video games. They think they're evil. I still get like a couple weeks before Adios came out, my dad actually texted me, basically said, "God does not support you making this game." Okay, so I'm kind of fighting against a current. It was much longer than that, but that's the gist of it. Um, I'm kind of fighting,
Yep.
against the current to get games made, right? I
Yep.
don't have that kind of familial support that a lot of my other dev friends have. Would like, oh yeah, I was talking with my brother or my sister about this game. I don't have any of that. So as a result, there were very few games I was allowed to play growing up. Like a couple educational games, Geo Safari, Number Maze, Oregon Trail. Um, Dad got upset at Amazon Trail when he found out there's like a Mystic Panther in it, and so he stopped letting us play it. Um, but one game that they did let me play was Microsoft Flight Simulator. And that's how I got into modifying airplanes. Like the first time I used the internet was so that I could get more planes for Flight Simulator. One time a friend came over and we were talking about it. I was like, "Yeah, this is the only game Dad lets me play." And I heard Dad yell from the other room, "It's not a game, it's a simulator." So that was how he justified it, I guess, was that it's a simulator, it's not a game, so it's okay. But as a result, I have a huge affinity for, affection for flight simulators. And once I dropped out of flight school because my health was bad, and they were like, "Yeah, even though you're an amazing pilot, you're not going to be allowed to fly planes for real anymore. You got to figure out some new career path." That was like my entire life, and it just all fell apart in about 2008. It was like, oh my god, I can't do this thing I've been trying to do since I was 2 years old.
Mm.
What am I gonna do? And when I went back to school, it was like, what if I did like make flight simulators instead of actual flying stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and as a result, I kind of started to get into actually like making just games in general and not just flight simulators. But as a result, yeah, when I hear the term walking simulator, to me it's an affectionate term. I know that there are people who dismiss it, and I actually had some friends who were like, "Why don't I see Adios in the store?" "Oh, it's because I blocked the walking sim tag." Um, and there's nothing we can really do about that, right? But for me, it's even more complex than this. Like, I'm sorry, this is a long answer, but
No, that's
every
exactly what I
E3.
wanted.
Okay, good, good. Every
We have a
E3,
guest on the podcast so that they talk to us.
I asked a
That's fair.
question that I thought would elicit perhaps something interesting. Yeah.
I hope this is okay. So every E3, some asshole comes out and is like, "Oh, there's violent games on stage, and it sucks, and we should have more non-violent games." And then they invariably mention like walking sims, right? But walking
Yeah.
sims kind of suck ass. Like, to put it politely, walking sims have a lot of like, you walk around and somebody talks at you, and you just hear the actually more interesting story being told your direction while you walk around. Like, Adios would suck if you played the game as Bill, who shows up at his dad's house after his dad's gone, and you like hear echoes of his dad's story. That would not be interesting, right? It's more interesting to play horseshoes or to hold a shotgun next to the guy who's got to kill you, right? And that's why there's the achievement where you can point the gun at the guy and it goes, "Nice try," right? Because we know the player's going to want that. There were originally going to be like several different places you could do that in the game. Like you could slam the car door on his head and then it would rewind. Things, or you could shoot him and it would jib him and then it would rewind. We were going to do things like that, ended up not doing it. But the nice try achievement is kind of still communicating that yes, Farmer thinks about it. He thinks
Mhm.
about fighting back, but he chooses not to. But every time I hear somebody be like, "Oh, non-violent games are so good," and then they mention these games that don't have verbs, it's like, "Oh, this sucks." So in 2017, when I started thinking about this, and I came up with the thing that became Paratopic, it was like, what if we do a bunch of different verbs? So I had driving, talking, because so many of these walking sims are solipsistic, right? You're walking around empty space, you're the only person who exists. So like,
Making me think of like here, everybody's gone to the Rapture,
right,
where
you're the
like
only
Yeah,
you don't
person.
do anything.
Yeah, there's no real people around, right? So my very first thought was, okay, you should be able to talk to somebody. So there's, a huge gas station sequence with the random dude you could just talk to, because I figured to make a walking sim actually mean something, you should be able to talk to other people because humans don't exist in a complete vacuum. There's always somebody else somewhere. So for me, I did that, and then I was like, well, I'm always mischievous as a person. I'm always going to do something, you know, inappropriate or whatever in the worst time.
Mhm.
So I obviously had to put, shooting someone into a walking. I wanted to make a violent walking sim. So, I gave you a gun and I had you shoot a person because that was what all these people were saying makes walking sims good is that you don't shoot people. So it's like, oh, well, you got to shoot somebody.
Yeah.
So then that idea evolved, and once I, moved on to work on Adios, it was the same kind of thing. Like, I would love to be making these, huge mechanics heavy, combat heavy video games, right? But I can't do that because I am poor. I had to do a GoFundMe so I could get dental surgery. Like this, I'm not some guy who could just, walk into like Sony or Microsoft and be like, give me, $50 million to make Death Stranding or whatever. I can't do that. So I have to be like, please, sir, can you give me some, like table scraps, like couch change so that I can make something? And so walking sims are one of the cheapest things that you can build, right? There's like twin sticks, walking sims, and what's the other one? I don't know. I'm blanking. There's a couple different like cheap games that you'll get in like random indie bundles and stuff that just.
Nintendo Hire This Man, Unreal Engine Forest games,
I mean, yeah. There's
or Unity rather.
I mean, there's so many walking sims or first-person horror games that are basically just walking sims. Like, ooh, there's no monster, there's no combat, run and hide. That's a walking sim. It just has, a hide mechanic added to it. Um, these are like very cheap games to make. It's why there are so many in these like crap bundles that you can buy. So I mean, this is me trying to make the cheapest game I could make, and doing the best I could with it. Right? So we have a ton of verbs like milking goats, shooting a man with the goat milk, which I thought was fucking hilarious. Um, talking to a horse, talking to the guy who's gonna kill you, making food. Like had a lot of different verbs beyond just like listening to a story being told at you about something completely unrelated. Um, you know, having people around was crucial, even though we didn't have a lot of money, so we only have 5 characters in the game, and only 2 of them are visible. And one of them only has like, God, like it's got like 10 lines. I think it's really short.
Yeah, he
right?
rolls,
But I mean,
rolls out. Yeah.
I was so lucky that Julian was down to play him. Because Julian was like, there's not a lot of like lines here. Like, how do I really get a sense of who this character is? It's like, okay, let me tell you his entire story. So I told him as much as I had for like what his whole game is going to be. He's like, all right, this helps me get into character, and it's so fun to work with actors because they want to embody your character. They're bringing them to life. There's nothing like having an actor bring the character to life. So that's a very long, rambly way of saying I love the concept of walking sim. I love being told, hey, I have no problem with the moniker, right? But so many of the games don't have verbs, and I think games need verbs to be meaningful in some way. And some people have got really mad at me about it. I wrote an article for a certain very famous video game magazine one time where I basically said, look, the reason that, Gone Home sold like a bajillion copies was because no one really knew what it was going to be. And when Tacoma came out and it only did 10,000 copies, that's because people had kind of figured out what these kind of games are, and they're not as interesting. It's why the Chinese room temporarily shuttered, because all these walking sim studios that made these big, acclaimed games that press liked, they got magazine covers and all this stuff, they just started kind of disappearing or not selling very well. And it's because people kind of figured out, oh, you don't really do much. You like hear a story, and subject matter isn't enough to carry a game. You need to be part of the story rather than hear a separate story from what you're doing. And when all you're doing is walking, it's boring. Hence me adding things like milking goats and playing skeet, shotgun.
That's something that's come up a lot in whenever I've described like shonen anime. One of the things that I see that happens really often, nowadays at least, is like there's the current story going on, but the generation that came before the current story are the badasses that you can only hear about. All the cool stuff happened in the past off screen, and you have to deal with the shitty, lamer new version of it.
I did appreciate that My Hero Academia does give us some of that though, like with the fight with what is it, All for One?
Even though they're like 1% like busted up old man versions of their existing selves, it's still 100 times crazier than everything you've seen up until that point.
It was a big build up to it, right? It was like three or how many seasons in,
But I think in general, absolutely. Like, I think I would rather see what was happening the generation before, like Naruto does his tournament arc. Has there ever been a tournament arc that's any good? I can't think of one I personally enjoy.
I mean, look,
depends what you're looking for.
I still stand on WoolieVersus Gaara. Like
because I dig tournament arcs myself,
but because it's I think the tournament arc thing is just it serves a purpose by introducing you to the cast of merch we're gonna sell you, and pick your favorite is all it is. It's a character select screen showing off what these characters do, like walking by an arcade machine and seeing a demo play for the rest of the story, essentially. And I mean, it does that job well. But it is pretty fucking played,
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, I should mention that article I said that I wrote. Some other editor, my editor loved it, but some other editor was like, this guy's shitting on, my friends who make these video games, and I don't like it. This guy's probably some horrible person. And so he spiked the piece. So I ended up posting it on my blog, so it's not on famous video game website. But that's okay.
It's fascinating to me to hear these descriptions because I'm looking at the Chinese. You mentioned Chinese room specifically, and so did I without realizing it when I talked about everybody's gone to the Rapture. And I don't typically think of games in terms of verbs. That seems like kind of a developer's point of view that I have not happened upon, but I'll try and incorporate it because I'm looking at Dear Esther, Amnesia, A Machine for Pigs, and Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. All games that I played. And all games that for their entire run times, I was sitting there going, when is something going to happen?
Yeah.
So, or the difference between, say, Gone Home and Firewatch, right? Having someone to talk to, actually.
Yeah. I haven't played Firewatch personally, but I really loved What Remains of Edith Finch, which had, tons of verbs, right? Like, you play as an octopus monster at one point, or you eat toothpaste, or, there's just a lot of stuff that happens in that game, like things you do. And when you do things, I think games are, like, that's what makes games interesting, right, is doing things. Holding down W on my keyboard, not interesting. To me, at least.
I'm just realizing, I'm thinking about Paratopic, and Paratopic is, like... Because we're talking about, like, say, Everybody Gone to the Rapture. You walk up to, like, a glowing thing, and somebody tells you a story that may or may not have anything to do with shit. And I'm thinking about Paratopic, in which, like, there's less than zero exposition, I feel like. Like, I came away from that game more confused about what it was than before I had started playing it.
Okay.
What's it, like? Basically,
I don't even know what it is,
sits
actually.
there and tells you anything. I was doing lots of things.
You were doing lots of things.
At no point did anyone come to tell me anything other than that they needed tapes, and then their head grew into a void.
Oh, is this like a spooky PS1 demake type thing?
Yeah, it was. I think we kind of kicked off that entire PS1 horror boom.
Okay.
Because we were like 2018, and then a bunch of games came after that. So I think that's. Like, Paratopic was the game that set that up. But So that game's a little bit weird because I was going for like with my own approach to the game, right? Because I'm the one who came up with the original pitch and pitched it to these other people, and then we went and made the game together. Um, but the pitch that I had was like, I really want to focus on like the emotionality of it, right? So, um, it is told out of order, but every scene is intended to build to, this emotion leads to this emotion, which leads to this emotion. So you were going on an emotional arc that still leads to its own, punchline. But at the same time, you're working with different people, and they all have different approaches or things that they want to achieve with the game. So some of the scenes end up having a different order than what I personally would have gone with, which isn't necessarily the right or the wrong thing. The game still had an impact. A lot of people still like it. Um, but as a result, some of the scenes are in sort of a different order, or you had people going, well, one person was like, hey, I think the game is going to be too short if we don't extend it somehow, so I'm going to pad it out by making the driving sequence really, really long. Um, so we had a different voices talking about how to direct that game, because it was kind of not hit bashed, but like it's a game where it was very by committee in our design approach. Like everybody had a say in how it was made. So I can tell you what I was thinking, but I can't tell you what other people were thinking. And I could tell you that there is a clear plot that happens in the game. But because the scenes are told out of order, built more for the emotion of the thing rather than like a clear series of like cause and effect that goes from A to B to C. If you reorder the scenes, you can figure out what happened, which is very simple. Which is there's a monster in the woods killing people. Somebody's trying to capture it on tape. He captures it, killing a photographer on tape. The tape itself becomes haunted. Anyone who watches that tape or tapes like it, their body is changed. And then we follow the tape as it's being smuggled away from where the murder scene happened. There is an assassin. She is trying to clean things up, so she kills one of the people who was distributing tapes, and then she goes out to the woods to get like the CCTV stuff or the photographer's camera that may also have pictures of the thing on it, and she finds the body and decides, even though she shouldn't, even though she's trying to clean it up, keep it all secret, she decides to call the cops and be like, hey, there's a dead girl out here and you should save her. It was supposed to be part 1 of 5, so that's only the pilot episode. It is what it is. But that's basically what it is. There is a story there, but it's a game we made in a couple of months while I was homeless, so difficult. I think one of the other people working on it was sleeping on a couch somewhere. Like it was made under difficult circumstances. But
Well,
yeah,
I didn't I hadn't heard of it until now, and I'm looking back. It says 2018 here. So, did you go like right back to back from this straight into Adios?
yeah.
Okay, right away. Okay.
There was I think we released it on Itch in March. I had my heart surgery from crunch on that game. Never crunch, it's bad for you.